on surveillance, corruption, and the illusion of innocent power. By Gurubsar Lankar Idabaguz. Those who still believe that privacy is an inherent right live under an illusion. Not because laws have been abolished, not because democracy has been traded for repression, but because power, technology, and scale have consumed its meaning. What was once exceptional, controlled, and rare has now become the norm. What once seemed a tool of protection has become an infrastructure of surveillance. What was once visible and accountable is now largely invisible. And those who do not perceive this have already accepted the system. The world we inhabit is built on information. Those who possess it control a fragment of reality. Those who have access to data possess power. And data is collected in ways ordinary citizens can scarcely comprehend. Laws exist, procedures exist, lawyers exist, and yet many feel more powerless than ever. Not because the law fails to function, but because systems operate at scales that render oversight impossible. Systems have no moral intuition. Systems have no empathy. They know only access, only efficiency. The public is reassured with stories of technology, end-to-end encrypted, unreadable by third parties, your privacy is guaranteed. It sounds comforting, modern, and secure. But technology is not ethics. Encryption may protect a message in transit, but not the device on which it is written, not the microphone in the same room, not the camera that observes, not the metadata that reveals patterns in relationships, not the context in which we act, not the systems that possess access. Privacy is not a switch to be turned on or off. Privacy is a balance of power, and that balance has shifted. Modern citizens carry their surveillance instruments themselves: phones, laptops, watches, cars, televisions, smart speakers, everything connected, everything measurable, everything potentially accessible. This does not mean everyone is constantly being listened to. But it does mean eavesdropping is always possible, a constant shadow, unseen yet present. And in a sober analysis, one rule applies: what is structurally possible will, sooner or later, be structurally utilized. Not always through malice, but through the nature of systems and the logic of efficiency. Those who do not see this do not understand power. It is therefore rational, not paranoid, to shield oneself physically, to limit what one shares, to understand that privacy is an active practice, not a given. Not because one has something to hide, but because autonomy demands continuous action. And these systems extend far beyond individuals. They reach into companies, institutions, the medical sector, research centers, creative industries. Knowledge has value, and where there is value, there is interest. Economic espionage is not a fantasy, not a conspiracy theory. It is a recognized phenomenon, international in scope, subtle, legally complex, and effective precisely because it is barely visible. Data need not be stolen, proximity, access, relationships, these can suffice. And here, the boundary between public authority and private interest blurs. Governments, corporations, advisory networks, all entwined in gray zones where external oversight is nearly impossible. For citizens and professionals, it is scarcely visible who operates under authority, under advisory roles, under exemptions. Not because misuse is automatic, but because oversight by outsiders is absent. Power without counterbalance need not be malevolent, but it is always fragile, always dangerous, because the potential for misuse always exists, even if it is not exploited. Within certain secret structures exist functions and operations are entirely invisible to the public. Sometimes agents operate on assignments, scarcely aware of one another, each within their own fragment of a complex infrastructure. They act with exceptional authority, powers that in theory enable them to make decisions beyond ordinary boundaries. No one outside these structures can trace their actions, and the systems are designed to shield their identities and deeds. This creates a reality in which power is concentrated, anonymity systematically preserved, and decisions of immense consequence made without public visibility. It is not a matter of individual guilt, but of how systems structure absolute discretion and exceptional authority, and how this breeds tension between liberty, ethics, and oversight. It is an abstract yet very real illustration of how modern power operates, compartmentalized, layered, anonymous, and often beyond the reach of democratic control, heightening the necessity for awareness, vigilance, and civic engagement. Meanwhile, society is expected to believe in equality, solidarity, and fairness. But experience shows equality is far from uniform. Those with capital, networks, and legal expertise navigate rules and procedures differently than those who do not. Mistakes, negligence, even transgressions do not carry the same consequences for everyone. The law is equal, but the outcomes are not. This erodes trust, even when all appears formally correct. Society itself has hardened. The respectable citizen adheres to rules and conventions but increasingly relies on a quiet, pragmatic morality of every man for himself. What matters is personal welfare, a better life, status, security. The wealthy, the influential, the powerful often use religion as a mask, outwardly pious, perhaps ritualistic, but without true belief in heaven or hell. Religion becomes a tool to deflect suspicion, a social shield to rationalize silence, bribery, and the protection of wealth. Belief in a higher punishment matters less than the belief that the world will not hold one accountable, so long as advantage is preserved. It is a subtle yet profound shift, a society in which ethics and justice are often replaced by strategy, fear of loss, and preservation of position. The judiciary is no absolute guarantee. Transparency is often a farce, and silent structures within courts operate as effectively as power mechanisms elsewhere. Class-based justice and corruption run rampant, sometimes visible, often hidden. Where oversight and counterbalance are absent, a vacuum forms in which silence thrives and power may overreach. No law, no procedure can fully shield against the system of silence. Those who understand this feel a paradox, powerless within structures they are expected to trust, trapped in a network of rules that provide both protection and limitation. Judges, juries, procedures, all human, all fallible, all embedded in a context that is never fully transparent. Absolute power exists nowhere without oversight, and it is precisely here, in the shadows of the legal system, that silence wields its deepest influence. Within this landscape emerges a word most prefer to ignore: corruption. Not because it does not exist, but because it is subtle, deliberate, and effective. Not as envelopes on tables, but as networks, reciprocal obligations, silent agreements, loyalty above transparency. The most effective corruption is legal enough to endure, and invisible enough to escape scrutiny. Silence is rewarded. Silence buys calm. Sometimes power. Not all who remain silent are complicit, yet the structures in which they operate often force a choice between truth and self-preservation. Some acts are socially deemed inconceivable: professionals under pressure, deliberate concealment of mistakes, rewarded silence. Precisely because they seem unthinkable, these practices disappear from public discourse. History repeatedly shows that serious abuses rarely begin as crimes. They begin as pressure, interest, loyalty, fear of losing position. Not because people are inherently malicious, but because systems compel them to choose. Silence has its own currency: status, protection, legal shielding, material benefits that bear no official name. Bribes rarely appear labeled as such, but their function is identical: buying silence is cheaper than enforcing justice. Matters vanish into procedure, confidentiality, bureaucratic language, or simply time. No conspiracy needed. Only a system that prioritizes stability over truth. States rarely fail through a single act. They fail through enduring invisibility. This very silence, this freedom of action within structures of power, these invisible authorities and shielded operations, they are not abstract phenomena. They are the silent, often unseen causes of a nation's potential downfall. Sooner or later, when power lacks counterbalance, where silence trumps responsibility, and when anonymity trumps transparency, weak foundations arise that destabilize a nation. The Netherlands is not immune. it is vulnerable to the quiet that protects power and obscures responsibility. And this is not solely America, as many imagine. Every European nation, every nation in the world, develops its own networks of power. Historically, symbolically, ritually, everywhere major decisions of war, exploitation, genocide, and population control are made, institutions function as instruments of justification and mask. Within these symbolic structures, the Black Pope plays a role, the one who quietly, in seclusion, guides strategic decisions, authorizes wars or exploitation, and advises and monitors power structures. The black robe signifies discretion, power unseen, decisions executed by others while the authority remains invisible. Opposite this figure is the white pope, the public persona who radiates compassion and morality, who uses rituals, ceremonies, and public appearances to project an image of justice and mercy. Symbolically pure, he is the face that conceals the black pope's decisive hand, so the world sees what it wishes, and suspicion is averted. In this duality, black for strategy, white for appearance, power is camouflaged, ethical questions neutralized, and accountability displaced from those who truly decide to the rituals that feign righteousness. The public, the people, and the international community all see only the white facade. Real decisions and their implications remain cloaked in silence and discretion. It is an age-old mechanism, power preserved, silence rewarded, ethical scrutiny masked. Symbolism and ritual function as shields for those who execute power while the world is persuaded of compassion and order. Those who still seek truth, who remain vigilant, must recognize that everything once assumed privacy, equality, justice is layered atop power, observation, silent loyalty, and suppressed truth. The world is not what it promises. Systems are not what they appear. Awareness, attention, responsibility, and these remain the only guarantees of autonomy. This is not fear. This is maturity. This is vigilance. This is freedom. Thanks for listening.